We're here. Finally, we have made it. I want to take a quick second to golf clap everyone. Pat yourself on the back. You made it through what felt like to me one of the longest off seasons in quite a while. Waiting on college football, desperate for this beautiful, beautiful sport to return. We are here week 0. Finally, talking season is over. We actually have games coming up. We're going to break down Kansas State and Iowa State, or Farmageddon, as we've come to know it by. Really the only major notable game in week 0, the week known as the appetizer week. We just valley parked the car. Appetizers are coming to the table. Right before week 1, we have this beautiful matchup in Ireland. Also have UNLV playing this week. New coach Dan Mullen there. Will be an interesting season out in Las Vegas. We have Fresno State and Kansas playing as well. Interested to see what Jalen Daniels has to offer this year for the Kansas Jayhawks. But without further ado, let's kick it off with Farmageddon. Iowa State coming off a conference championship appearance. Kansas State coming off a season where things didn't quite go their way, but it wasn't a terrible year. Both teams looking to continue to chase that conference title, maybe make the playoffs. Obviously, if they win it, they're in. So we have two teams here, pretty similar in some respects, across the talent rosters. Both have similar ambitions. So who's going to win? I know who's going to win, so let's break it down real quick. Point spread on this game, Kansas State is favored by 3. So -3 on the point spread for them. Money line, Iowa State is plus 130 on the money line. The over-under for this game, 49.5. So Kansas State, 14th in returning production, 4th in the Big 12. You promoted your Matt Wells, who was the co-offensive coordinator last year, to the full-time offensive coordinator this year. You've got 5 returning defensive starters. I'll get to why that's important here in a moment. So coming off 2024, Kansas State, you're 85th in passing offense, and you're 11th in rushing offense in the entire country. So Avery Johnson needs to continue to develop and progress. That passing offense needs to be better. But speaking of Avery Johnson, your returning quarterback, you also returned Dylan Edwards, who last year, 74 carries for 546 yards, 7.4 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns. You also got the transfer from ULM, Antonio Martin, 230 carries last year for 1,228 yards, 11 touchdowns, 5.5 yards nearly per carry. So you've got 2 great running backs. It's going to be a good 1-2 punch for the Kansas State Wildcats there. If we can get Avery Johnson to step up his game, although he didn't have a terrible season last year. QBR 69.7 for the Big 12, 2,712 yards, 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He also carried the ball 52 times for 296 yards. So Avery Johnson, if we could knock those interceptions down to below 5 this year and keep that, touchdown margin where it is, 25, 30, I'd say that'd be a really good year for Avery Johnson. On the Iowa State side, 41st in returning production in the country, 10th in the Big 12, and most notably losing that big receiver to the NFL. Rocco Becht, returning quarterback here. So last year, 3,505 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. So real similar to Avery Johnson in that respect. He also runs the ball really well, 98 carries, 318 yards. QBR similar, 69.4. So they're right there. Those two quarterbacks are very, very similar. A lot of talk about Avery Johnson just kind of nationally, but Rocco Becht at Iowa State is a very similar style of quarterback. They can both sling it. They can both run it. Running backs, they got Carson Hansen coming back and Abu Sama the third. Carson Hansen, 151 carries for 752. 124 for 587 for Abu. 15 touchdowns between the two. 5 yards per carry for Carson, about 4.7 for Abu. So real kind of similar running backs there they have. Whenever you compare these quarterbacks, they are, like I said, they're pretty similar style of play. I give the edge here to probably the Kansas State running backs. So who has the edge in this game? I think this game needs to be won. If you're Kansas State, it needs to be won on the ground. Shy of, we need to see Avery Johnson develop. I would like to see him come out and kind of sling it around a little bit. Have a good, I don't want to say pro. You don't have to look like a pro quite yet in the pocket, but have a mature, intense pocket presence and be able to deliver the ball in the intermediate passing game. Maybe hit a deep shot or two, show you can down the field to make that defense, really have to work and spread them out a little bit. If you can combine that with that 1-2 punch they have at running back there, then I think Kansas State's going to go up and down the field all day. Maybe not a ton, but they're going to control the ball for sure. Iowa State, I think that those running backs will have to take a jump. I don't think if you're comparing the Iowa State running backs to the Kansas State, I'd give the edge to the Wildcats there as far as talent goes. But I think that Iowa State probably needs to win through the air more so than Kansas State does. I don't really see a shootout coming unless Iowa State can step up and stop the run. If they can stop Kansas State from running the ball down their throat, which I think is exactly what Kansas State wants to do, then all bets are off. We're going to see Avery Johnson and Rocco Becht out there running, breaking the pocket, passing down the field. It's going to be quick drives. It's going to kind of turn into a shootout, I think, if they can stop the run on the Iowa State side. So, again, on defense for Kansas State, we've got a couple D linemen, 2 linebackers, and a safety returning from last season. On Iowa State side, we've got, a D line, 2 linebackers, and 2 cornerbacks. So I think that with those returning starters, the development there, I think that Iowa State will really challenge Avery Johnson. They'll challenge his ability to throw the ball, which is, like I said, going to force them to probably run more. So it's all going to hinge on Kansas State's run game and Iowa State's ability to stop it. I think that Kansas State has the edge here just because of that run game. I think that they match up pretty evenly passing the ball, maybe the edge to Iowa State because of Rocco Becht. But if Avery Johnson takes a jump forward, then that's going to, close that gap even farther. So, if it comes down to passing, Iowa State. If it comes down to running, like I think it will, Kansas State. So I predict Kansas State to win this game. I will take them at -3. I think that's probably going to be more like a touchdown or 10-point game. So I think that line's pretty small right now, but by the end of the game, we're going to recognize that it should have been a little bit bigger. For the over-under, I think it's going to be a relatively low-scoring game, so I would take the under of 49.5. I could see like a 24-17 type of game, so that would keep you right under that 49.5. I wouldn't touch the money line really unless you just want to put some money on Kansas State, but it's pretty thin there on that margin. So yeah, it's a really important game for both teams because both of these teams having this head-to-head when it comes down to it at the end of the year with the competitive balance of the Big 12, a head-to-head like this at week 0 can really pay dividends, massive dividends come November whenever we're looking at who's going to make the conference championship game and therefore probably the playoff. So getting this one right off the rip in Ireland is going to be huge for either one of these teams, but I give the edge here to Kansas State. So, unfortunately, not a lot of other games to predict this week. I'm not going to spend too much time on, UNLV and or Kansas and Fresno State or anything. Did kind of touch on that, but I'll, have my eye on those games, but not going to do a full breakdown here. Going to have a short week for week 1 next week as the games start on Thursday. We have games Thursday all the way through Monday, so there's going to be a lot of work to do next week, but for now, this is the only game I'm breaking down this week. However, I do have some hot takes I kind of want to tend to coming up next. If you would do me a solid, just take a quick moment, follow the podcast, leave a 5-star review, subscribe on YouTube if you're listening there, and don't forget to follow me over on X at Campus Pigskin. Really helps. I love growing the audience here. I love talking to y'all and interacting with y'all over on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. But if you could do that so you don't miss an episode, I would appreciate it very much. I appreciate anyone who listens. All right, so I knew it was going to be a fairly short episode today regardless, but I did want to fill a little more time up on it and do some hot takes. I think it's just kind of fun. So some of these, if you listen to any of the predictions that I've made or if you've gone through that episode or seen any of the posts from X, some of these may contradict that, but that's why we call them hot takes, right? So I got 5 takes that are steaming right here in front of me. I'm going to start Texas, the Texas Longhorns. Everyone's all on the hype train for Arch Manning. He's going to win the Heisman, take Texas back to the glory days, win the national championship year 1 with a new starting quarterback. I'm not so sure. I think maybe Texas takes a step back. I don't think people are ready to face that either. There is a legitimate possibility that Texas could be 3-2 going into the Oklahoma game and come out 3-3. So they have 5 losable games. They've got Ohio State, obviously, at Florida, Oklahoma, at Georgia, and Texas A&M. So they've got Ohio State and Florida prior to that Oklahoma game. Ohio State on the road, Florida obviously as well on the road. So if you go up to Columbus week 1 and you, regardless of the final score, you just don't come out the winner there, the pressure is going to be on going into that Florida game. Because if we have a healthy DJ Lagway, which still at this point in August 19th, we still don't fully know for sure if we're going to have a healthy DJ Lagway. He's been held out of scrimmage. He hasn't been practicing consistently. He's not even throwing in 7-on-7. He had a shoulder injury that he was battling throughout the offseason. Right before camp, he had that leg injury. So DJ Lagway's health is very much a concern for the Florida Gators at this moment in time. But hopefully by the time this game rolls around, when Texas heads down to Florida, he will be on the field healthy and playing. If that is the case, Arch Manning, the Texas Longhorns in the swamp, you got Florida, who's a very talented team. Don't let them fool you. With one of the potentially best quarterbacks in the country, I think they could easily come out of that with a loss as well. That's not crazy by any means. The margins and the lines between teams are thinner and thinner. They're blurrier and blurrier. If you go and you lose to Ohio State and Florida, that would put you at 2 losses. You're going to beat, San Jose State and Sam Houston, whoever else you play, your cupcakes. But that would put you at 3-2 coming into Oklahoma. And that's not a crazy, I say it's a hot take, but it's also not a crazy thing that could happen. It's very, it's not necessarily likely, but it's not unreasonable to imagine that. And then if you go into Oklahoma 3-2, Oklahoma, who is a hellish team to face on defense, who is also looking to improve offensively massively, that game at a neutral site becomes a lot more of a coin flip, which if that's a coin flip, that means you can lose that one as well. Just because you're on you've already lost 2 games doesn't mean you can't lose a third. You can come out of that Oklahoma game if you're Texas 3-3. And let's just think about that for a second. You come in to the season, you got the Heisman favorite. You got national championship expectations after back-to-back semifinal playoff appearances, and you come into this next season 3-3. Boy, talk about things getting hot down there. They just gave Chris Del Conte an extension, so he's safe, but things can get out of hand really quickly if you come in and you go 3-3 to start the season there at Texas. So let's keep our eye on that. Again, not going to bet on that necessarily, but it's also kind of a dangerous road ahead, more than I think some people give it credit for. But regardless, hot take number 2. Just trying to think here how I want to start this, but I guess I'll just go for it. Auburn fires Hugh Freeze and hires Dave Aranda. Wouldn't that be crazy? Hugh Freeze. So the thing about Auburn is their roster was so unbelievably depleted when Hugh Freeze got there. At no fault to him, however, it has not gone super well. Some of the ways that you've lost football games is not necessarily because of a lack of roster talent. It has been at times, but there's been several other, occasions that are plentiful enough that you lost that because of coaching. So Hugh Freeze, I think, gets Auburn one step closer, regardless of the final outcome of his tenure. He gets them one step closer as far as building a roster. If you take Texas A&M, for example, Mike Elko didn't walk in exactly to a ready-made roster, but it was a hell of a lot farther down the line than Auburn's was, even though they lost to them last year on the Plains. So if Auburn has a terrible season once again, which I kind of feel like they will, what are the odds that Dave Aranda, who worked some magic last year, let's say he has Baylor, right there in the thick of it in November, what are the odds that Dave Aranda, who was a coordinator in the SEC, and who has, had some success at Baylor. What are the odds he becomes a hot target, I think, for coach for openings throughout the country? And I think there's going to be a bit of a coaching carousel this year, a lot more than we had the last year or two. So if that job comes open, he could absolutely be a candidate, which means come week 1, we could be watching Dave Aranda coach against his future employer. Wouldn't that be interesting? But like I said, he's going to be a coach to poach, I think, regardless of what happens at Auburn this year. I think Dave Aranda and the Baylor Bearcats, are they even Bearcats? No, they're not Bearcats. That's Sam Houston. The Baylor Bears are going to have a great season regardless. So, moving on. Hot take number 3 on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon, August 19th. The big boys, the big brands all take a step back. Now, that may not seem hot on the surface, but it would mean that we just have a season of complete chaos. So, think about Ohio State. Not a lot returning. Rebuilding, reloading, rebuilding, whatever you want to say. But regardless, 101-ish in returning production, new quarterbacks. You still have Jeremiah Smith there at wide receiver, but new quarterback, new running backs. You're replacing pieces all across the defense and on the offense. You also are replacing both coordinators, with Penn State taking your defensive coordinator, Chip Kelly, also leaving after last season's national championship. So you're replacing both coordinators. You're essentially, this is about as, new of a program as we could see without having a coaching change. There's a lot of new pieces here, which obviously is a huge talking point around their game against Texas week 1. But with that being said, they got Texas on the schedule, they got Michigan on the schedule, they got Penn State on the schedule. They could go 9-3 this year. They could collapse down the stretch and maybe even go 8-4. That's not, and we could look back and say, man, those new coordinators, they just didn't mesh well with those players off their rip here. We should have seen that coming. Man, Julian saying he's talented, but he's still raw. He needs to be refined. We could absolutely be saying that come season's end. Man, those running backs were good, but they just were not as good as the 2 we had last year. That's absolutely something we could be saying about Ohio State come season end. So Notre Dame, kind of similar, little bit here. You are starting, still yet to be determined as of August 19th who you're going to start at the quarterback position. But, you are starting someone new there. I do think that you're probably going to be as good-ish as you were last year. Probably 10-2 is 9-3 is the floor there. So I don't really expect them to be a big brand that takes a step back. But Michigan, for example, who is starting a true freshman quarterback, still kind of have to rebuild that talent roster after its depletion the last 2 seasons, and a lot of players going to the NFL. They do have a crazy over under at 9.5, but we could look back at Michigan and say, man, while Sharon Moore was suspended for those 2 games, they won them, but it just kind of threw the team's rhythm off. They dropped a game to someone they weren't supposed to lose to. Bryce Underwood, he's been really good, but just that one game, say he just has one game where he's just not clicking and things just do not work. And we get to the end of the year and they're, 7-5 again after spending $12 million on a quarterback. You go down the line, you think about Oregon, same thing here, just so many places replacing so much talent. They lost Trey Harris. They lost his name's slipping me at the moment, Tez Walker to the NFL. Evan Stewart's out for the season, so they're a little thin there at wide receiver, starting a new quarterback. So, things may not be so, although they do have a relatively easy schedule. USC, maybe that defense. We all talk about them, how they took a step forward last year. We expect them to continue that progression. What if they take a step back? These are human beings. It's not automatic. Georgia, Alabama, Texas, new starting quarterbacks this year. So I'm not going to keep harping. It's just kind of the same situation all around. But like I said, the big brands take a step back. That just, chaos ensues. That would really lead to a crazy year. So hot take number 4, if you are still interested. Jeremiah Love wins the Heisman. He comes into this season as probably one of, easily top 3 running back in the country, maybe number one, depending on who you ask. So, and like I said, that team is starting a new quarterback, which means you're probably a little bit, the first half of the season, you're going to have to lean on that running back room with Jeremiah Love being the tip of the spear, probably of the offense to start the year. The last time a running back won the Heisman was 2015, Derrick Henry. So I kind of talked about that previously with Jadarian, is it Smith? I think his last name is, who they also have. They have a good 1-2 punch, so that may kind of hold him back a little bit just with how much depth they have there and want to keep him fresh. But I think that Jeremiah Love, in a year where we have so much kind of uncertainty around the sport at quarterback and a lot of new coordinators shifting around, I think maybe a running back like him could sneak in there this year and win the Heisman. So, but wrapping up with hot take number 5. It's not going to sound so hot, but once I get through the list and kind of elaborate, it may seem a little hotter than you would expect. But Florida State, Auburn, Kentucky, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Wisconsin. Say all of these schools fire their head coaches this year. That, like I said, would put the coaching carousel in a freaking swing. Not like we've seen in the last, like we haven't really seen the last couple of years. So, and none of those are really that crazy either. However, one of the things that could kind of prevent something like this from happening, coaches are going to have a little bit longer leash than they have had previously. Records, like 9-3 is kind of the new 10-2. So I think, with athletic department spending, with rev share, it's not as easy as it was even for, there's probably 10 schools that could afford a pretty big buyout. How many schools could afford, let's just start here, a Jimbo Fisher type buyout? Not many. Obviously A&M could, because they did it. Maybe, Texas could. I'm not so sure, like LSU, for example. I don't think they could fire Brian Kelly in the next 2 years, even if they wanted to, because I don't know how, I'm not confident in their, maybe they have the technically they have the ability to pay that buyout, but it would just make the margins on the athletic departments, spending so thin that you just can't pull the trigger. So there could be some situations like that, at Kentucky, for example, with Mark Stoops. Same thing, Florida State, after that season, Mike Norvell got a pretty lofty extension. So Auburn, though, they're going to pull the trigger on him if they don't have a great year. I think Wisconsin, they'll pull the trigger. Oklahoma, they just gave Venables an extension like a year ago. I'm not quite sure what his buyout is off the top of my head, but I don't think it's quite as lofty as, as it could be. So I think that, those are some schools that we could see all of them fire their coaches, which that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4 SEC teams, a Big 10, a Big 12, and an ACC team. So we could see some major movement from the G5 or just from the coordinator level shifting around this year. But like I said, if even half those teams, fire their coach, then I still think it's, a pretty interesting coaching carousel we have in front of us. But that finishes up the hot take portion of the episode. Just wanted to say thank you again for listening to the latest episode of the College Football Podcast. Only really one game to break down this week, but next week is week 1, and we will have a lot of games to go through. We got Ohio State and Texas, Notre Dame and Miami. We've got LSU Clemson. We've got Bama, Florida State. A ton more to get to next week. Colorado and Georgia Tech. Going to break all those teams down here on the College Football Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on X at Campus Pigskin. Follow the podcast feed. Going to be doing reaction episodes every week. Going to be doing previews and predictions every week. I have graphics to go with it on the socials. So make sure you follow me at all of those places. And until next time, appreciate you listening.